Okay, so we've gone over ionic bonding, we've gone over covalent bonding. Now what we're going to do is figure out some rules of thumb that you can use to determine how you put a molecule together when you've got a bunch of different atoms. How do you put it all together to make what a molecule should look like? So I've got some quick rules of thumb that you're probably going to want to follow. First of all, always place the element with the most number of possible bonds in the middle of the molecule. So carbon having 4 bonds possible is going to be in the middle of the molecule, and things are going to bond to the outside of that. Nitrogen with 3 bonds will often be among the most bonds, and it also has a tendency to be in the middle of a molecule. So take a look at this molecule right here. This is C2H6, which is ethane. Notice how I have the carbons in the middle of the molecule because they can make the most bonds. And I've got these hydrogens who make fewer, only 1 bond, on the outside. Rule number 2, which is place elements that only make 1 bond on the outside of the molecule. Things like hydrogen or halogens, fluorine, chlorine, etc. Always place them on the outside because they can only make 1 bond, so they're not going to be able to go into the middle. So here's another example of rule number 2. So we know that halogens like chlorine and bromine and fluorine can only make 1 bond. So in the case of these 2 molecules up here, you'll notice that the bromine's sitting on the outside, it's attached to the carbon, and the chlorines are sitting on the outside. They can only make 1 bond, so they go to the outside. The carbons, because they can make more than 1 bond, are going to be sitting in the middle. Rule number 3, chain all your carbons together. Don't separate your carbons. The first thing you should do before you even build the molecule is take any carbons you have, make a chain out of it. So in this case, we have 6 carbons, so we're going to attach those 6 together in a chain, and then we can start attaching the things that only make 1 bond to the outside of that. Rule number 4, the element with the highest electronegativity tends to bond with the element with the lowest electronegativity. So you don't want to have oxygen bond to another oxygen because those 2 atoms have really high electronegativity. They're going to go for an atom who they can take the electrons from more easily. They're going to go for an atom that has a lower electronegativity. So for instance, if you have molecules that contain carbon and oxygen and hydrogen, the oxygens are going to have a tendency to either go to the carbon or the hydrogen and not bond to each other. So don't bond oxygens together if you can absolutely avoid it. So in the case of this molecule here, you'll notice that this oxygen is bonding to both a carbon and a hydrogen. They have much lower electronegativity. This oxygen's bonding to that carbon. So if we put all our rules together, rule number 1 is put the things with the most bonds in the middle. So we're putting our carbons in the middle because they can make 4 bonds. This oxygen can make 2 bonds, so it's kind of in the middle, but it's still more to the outside. Rule number 2, take things that can only make 1 bond and put them on the outside. So we've got 4 hydrogens available. Those 4 hydrogens are going to bond to the outside. Do not chain your carbons together. So that's rule number 3. Well, here's the 2 carbons bonded together. And then rule number 4, don't bond your oxygens together. Bond them to things that have lower electronegativities. Those are your rules of thumb, and if you follow those, you can build most molecules simply by looking at their chemical formula.